down in Alabama, 1955. Not many of us here today were then alive. A young Baptist preacher led a bus boycott. He showed a way for a brand new day without firing a shot. Don't say it can't be done, the battle's just begun. Take it from Dr. King, you too can learn to sing, so drop the gun.
Felix Adler once said, quote, "We cannot adopt the way of living that was satisfactory 100 years ago. The world in which we live in has changed, and we must change with it," end quote. The United States needs to take Felix Adler's stance on change and apply it to its hate crime legislation. Today in the United States, the federal government does not fully protect gays against hate crimes, while they protect nearly every other minority. This exclusion is an anachronism to our modern-day stance on the importance of equality. It is time for the federal government to catch up and change our current hate crime legislation to include sexual orientation. Currently, the legislation surrounding the states and the federal government is convoluted and not cohesive. Universal hate crime legislation, similar to a universal drinking age, is necessary to clear that confusion surrounding hate crimes. Since the civil rights movement, a hate crime has been defined as the FBI as, quote, "a criminal offense motivated against a person, property, or society, which is motivated, in whole or in part, by the offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or ethnicity, national origin," end quote. Hate crimes are message crimes meant to terrorize a group of people by making an example of an individual. When a group is protected under hate crime legislation, it makes the public aware that the group is vulnerable, has been extensively victimized in the past, is in need of protection. Perpetrators face increased sanctions when charged with a hate crime offense, which may include extended jail time, increased fines, or often both. The idea behind a hate crime law is to prevent crimes against minorities, to promote equality by increasing the severity of punishments. Because the FBI's definition of hate crime includes sexual orientation, it would be rational to assume that gays are included in federal hate crime legislation and therefore a protected minority. But this is not true, and herein lies the discrepancy. Definition and the application of law are not the same. What this means is that although a hate crime can occur that is defined as a hate crime, it does not necessarily mean that the legal system can charge the agitator with a hate crime offense. The first federal legislation that could charge an agitator with such an offense was the 1968 Hate Crime Prevention Act. This act gave the federal government authority to intervene in hate crimes for the first time. The act, following the civil rights movement, unsurprisingly protected minorities of race, color, religion, ethnicity, and national origin. Sexual orientation was left out. The act was limited since the federal government can only administer aid to the victim if the agitator interferes with the victim's constitutionally protected rights, such as voting, going to school, or working. Although the federal government was limited by the Constitution in its ability to intervene, the act set a standard for the states to emulate. The states are the ones that have the power to formulate their own legislation. Although 44 states in the District of Columbia have hate crime prevention acts, only 25 of them in DC include gays as a protected minority. Of the states that do not protect gays, 6 of those states have no hate crime prevention acts at all. Not surprisingly, the majority of states which do not protect sexual orientation, Virginia included, are below the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt is used to draw a line to show where the majority of religiously devout citizens are located. Here is a map of the United States that shows the Bible Belt outlined in red. On the following slide, states that have been blacked out do not protect gays in their hate crime legislation. Judging by the congregation of these states, it would be logical to assume that religion, not the importance of equality, is swaying politics. States with up-to-date hate crime prevention acts see a greater number of hate crimes than states without such acts. Critics use these numbers to devalue the importance of prevention acts by claiming that they are ineffective. The critics' point is illogical at best. The states have more hate crimes because they have stricter laws that protect more minorities. Minorities feel protected in those states and are therefore more open. This inadvertently makes them a target. Population is also not taken into account when critics use these numbers. California and New York both had a surprising number of hate crime victims, but these states also have a surprisingly large population. There simply isn't enough hard evidence against the effectiveness of such prevention acts. There is, however, evidence that shows that prevention acts are indeed important. Hate crime victims because of a racial bias have decreased by about 500 since 2001. All other protected minorities, like religion and national origin, have seen similar results. The only minority to see an increase in its number of hate crime victims was the unprotected minority of sexual orientation. This data supports the belief that prevention acts are necessary to reduce bias-motivated crime. The latest federal hate crime legislation came with the introduction of the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. This act finally included sexual orientation as a protected group. The newest legislation is the most practical as it extends federal protection for gays to include all federal ground, including DC and national parks. What the act failed to do, however, was update the 1968 Hate Crime Prevention Act to include sexual orientation. Gays are still not protected as they should be, since they are only protected on federal ground. Even if the federal government does not have the ability to dictate state law, it does have the responsibility to be a model for the states. If the federal government insists on expanding hate crime prevention acts to include gays, the states are likely to follow, as demonstrated by prior legislation. This follow the leader tactic has been proven successful before in regards to drinking age, legal substances, and driving age. When the states choose not to emulate the federal government's example, the feds have the power to deny funding, coercing the states to employ similar legislation. But by not taking adequate and immediate measures, the federal government is setting a bad example. One state that has followed that example is home to the radical evangelical movement, GodHatesFags.com. The state is Wyoming, home to Matthew Shepard. October 11th, 1998. Matthew Shepard, a Wyoming University student, was robbed, pistol whipped, and tied to a fence left to die. He was discovered by a cyclist 18 hours later who thought the lump bound to the fence was a scarecrow. Matthew Shepard, 21, was brought to the local hospital where his injuries were recorded. Lacerations around his head, face, and neck, and extensive brainstem damage that incapacitated Matthew's ability to regulate heart function, body temperature, and body movement. Matthew Shepard was taken off life support and pronounced dead at 12:53 a.m. October 12th. The two men who'd done this admitted in court that they beat Michael because he was gay and called him faggot as they beat him. Under Wyoming law, this act of violence was not defined as a hate crime. It was under federal law, but since Matthew Shepard was not engaged in an explicit constitutional right, the federal government could do nothing. Wyoming had followed big government's example and did not include sexual orientation as an included class in hate crime prevention acts. Matthew's mother, Judy, shocked at the discrepancy between the definition of hate crimes and the application of law, spent the years after her son's death drafting and sponsoring the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crime Prevention Act, also referred to as the Matthew Shepard Act. The Matthew Shepard Act is a much-needed update to the 1968 Hate Crime Prevention Act and would include sexual orientation, disability, and gender to the already protected classes. The act also carries with it increased sanctions against states that do not include the 3 new minorities in their own state legislation. Not surprisingly, this act has sparked huge controversy and opposition from southern states and social and religious conservatives. For instance, religious leader Bob Knight criticized the Matthew Shepard Act, saying, quote, "The government has no business creating special classes of victims and politicizing crime. If an individual's sexual orientation is a federally protected right, the logical conclusion is that moral, religious, or personal beliefs about certain behaviors would be criminalized. The freedoms of speech and conscience would be lost." End quote. Bob Knight's fears of living in a country that limits freedoms of conscience and speech are unwarranted. Hate crime prevention acts prevent exactly what the name implies: crime. If the Matthew Shepard Act is passed, people like Jerry Falwell would still be free to say, quote, "AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals, it is God's punishment for a society that tolerates homosexuals," end quote, or, quote, "Homosexuals are brute beasts, part of a violent satanic system that'll be utterly annihilated, and there'll be a celebration in heaven." Another common controversy against the Matthew Shepard Act is put best by religionstolerance.org when they use this argument, quote, "By granting special consideration to victims of politically incorrect crimes, the legislation denies equal protection under law," end quote. Well, the laws are fair. A hate crime is more serious than a conventional crime because it abuses more than the immediate victim. When a criminal act is based on factors such as a victim's race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, the act is not just against the individual, but who that individual represents. It should be evident by now that the federal government's ability to interfere with state laws is limited, and the most that big government on Capitol Hill can do is set a positive example and refuse federal aid to states who do not emulate their example. So where does the power to change the federal legislation or the state's legislation lie? The answer is found in the first line of the United States Constitution, "We the people." Andy Warhol put it best when he said, quote, "They say that time changes things, but you actually have to change them for yourself," end quote. Since federal hate crime legislation has remained unchanged since 1968, Andy Warhol is onto something. The power to push legislation is in our hands. We are the solution. We, the citizens, must use our rights to achieve equality. Protesting, petitioning, writing a congressman, educating. These tactics have been proven effective time and again. The states may be a reflection of the federal government, but both the states and the federal government are reflections of us. The 1968 Hate Crime Prevention Act was passed because of the civil rights movement, passed because citizens demanded equality. It is our duty to be active in our government and fight for the preservation of the values included in the Constitution: equality, separation of church and state, and free speech. Recently, the Matthew Shepard Act has been passed in the House and now faces a vote in the Senate in the upcoming months. Now is the time to push for change. Now is the time to act.
You told me things would have changed, and now we're back here again. You left me nowhere to start, and watch me falling apart. There's nothing left I can say. To stop it ending this way. I think you wanted me here. To watch it all disappear.
The Senate did vote in favor of the bill, but 3 days ago, the Matthew Shepard Act was dropped from the defense finance bill it was attached to because it was clear that Democratic House members were unwilling to sign off on the new bill because it would increase Bush's budget in Iraq. If the bill wasn't dropped, Mr. Bush had already promised to veto the bill at all costs, calling the Matthew Shepard Act unnecessary. In order to have vetoed the Matthew Shepard Act, he would have had to veto the defense finance bill, putting our troops at increased risk to deny protection to a minority on home turf. In order to be successful, the Matthew Shepard Act must not be attached to any other legislation. The House and the Senate have both shown that they are ready to take hate crime legislation to the next level, and it would be commonsensical to expect its success in such a state. Even though civil rights groups may feel helpless, it's important to remember that the power will always return to us. Most seniors in this room, some juniors, and almost all faculty will be eligible to vote when the next presidential election comes around. I insist that each and every one of you register to vote for the candidate you believe will provide equality for all minorities without regard to the candidate's party affiliation. Parties are unimportant. Policy is of the utmost significance. Charles Darwin believed, quote, "It is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change," end quote. Will you be responsive to and an agent of change? Don't say it can't be done. Thank you.